Good morning, fellas. Good to see you all, like always, on this Wednesday morning. Um, this is, of course, week 202 today, John 16, 4 through 7. We began chapter 16 last week, verses 1 through 3, and, we'll move on here. Next week and the week after, I'm going to be traveling. So I will not be on the 8th or the 15th. But you guys can still meet. And then I'll be back on the 22nd. So I've got 2 weeks I'll be gone. So um take a little break here, but then we'll get back to it with the following week to what week 203. So let's go ahead and dive into
Mike, quick question. Do we just log on as always then?
Yeah, just like always.
Okay.
When I log on, I just join the group. You guys are already on it. So, and I'm assuming now if one of you want to do a teaching next week, that's fine. It the coordination is loosely handled between Steve and Bill. But just feel free to do do whatever you'd like. So, um, last time we looked at verses 1 through 3, as already mentioned, and Jesus is describing the coming mistreatment by what he labels as the world. And I think it's important for us to drill down according to what he is saying. It's specifically those who hate. It's those who hate is what are who he's talking about. It's not outsiders per se, as is often perceived within our heads. He's talking specifically about those who hate, and those who hate are from primarily the religious leadership perspective, the religious the religious leader contingency. So anyway, that is what we looked at last week. The reason for the coming mistreatment, according to Jesus, is because those who hate don't know the Father. That's his wording. They don't know the Father because they are unwilling to let go of their self-supporting constructs of thinking. That's me. That's my interpretation. It's not like they have to go through a set of hoops. They just need to let go of their own self-protecting constructs of thinking. They view Jesus as a threat, like he's there and can take something away from them, and they don't like that. I then introduced this idea towards the end of last session, and the idea was this: to know anything, I must first let go of what I think. To know anything, I must first let go of what I think. And then we talked about that idea of letting go. Unless I let go, I'm not open to something new. That's what's underlying. Of course, we kind of threw that out as something to talk about. And then we discussed our thoughts in regard to that statement. So that was last week. This week we have a new text, verses 4 through 7, and maybe ask one of you guys to read that. Could you read it from the screen or from your Bible? Whichever you prefer.
But I've told you these things so that when their time would come, you would remember these things that I told you. I did not say these things to you from the beginning because I was with you. But now I am going to the one who sent me, and none of you can ask me, where are you going? To you, sorrow has filled your hearts. But I am telling you the truth. it is profitable for you that I would leave. For if I would not leave, the Comforter will not come to you. But if I would go back, I will send him to you.
Thanks, Dave, for reading that. And let's just dive into it. Oh, before I do, he is preparing his disciples for what is next. And he has been beginning through chapters 14, 15, and now we're in 16. You know, quite honestly, I can't remember 13 when I think a portion of 13 is when is the last the actual Last Supper? Never mind. It's we're in 13, 14, 15, and now 16. So this entire area, I'm glitching on 13, is about preparation for what is to come. 16:4, he's saying, in a sense, I'm using this little phrase, time to dress. You remember, any of you, those of you, I know, John, you played college sports. Some of you played high school and other sports. But there comes a time when it's time to dress. Guys, time to dress. And that means you go to the locker room and you get ready for the game or the match, whatever it is. And that's where we're at in this preparation. It's time to dress. So that's what Jesus and his disciples are about, all about here. These things I have spoken to you, Jesus says to his disciples, so that when their hour comes, that is, those who hate, you may remember that I told you of them. However, I didn't say these things to you at the beginning because I was with you. So let's look at that, that verse. First of all, Jesus stated, remember a few weeks back, and I don't have the text on the tip of my tongue. He says, I now call you friends. Well, his wording here in this moment that I'm envisioning at this time is all about friendships. And it's because friends explain to friends the why. That's part of friendship. Friendship is the why. The master-slave relationship is strictly bound to the what. Go do this, go do that. But there is not the why component in a master-slave relationship. He's bringing them in. When he says, I'm calling you friends, that's bringing them into a closer relationship. And he's talking about the why, and he will continue to talk about the why in the next at least 4 weeks. I picture this as an intimate, closed circle of friends. You know how we guys, we tend to gather around in a circle and we stand and we look at each other. It's just part of being a man and part of being human. And these guys are drawn together through a common set of experiences. And I think that they're being drawn closer into the circle. Everyone standing within this circle at this moment, they know it's about we. It's the team. It's the us. It's the we. And it's about, he's talking about we. He provides a brief explanation of why the troubling news of his departure at this time rather than earlier. At first reading, it may sound like a bit of an apology, kind of like I know I left it out, but you know, for whatever reason we derive in our heads. But I take a different view, and I'd like to share that with you. To get the sense of why he brings this up, that he didn't mention it earlier, we need to go to the next verse, verse 5. So here's verse 5. And the title of this verse, I'm calling it How You Are Thinking. And of course, that's what he's doing here in verse 5. And it is in perfect concert with why he withheld to this point at this time. Now I'm going to him who sent me. He's referring to the Father. And none of you, now imagine them standing around in a circle in this upper room. And he says, I'm leaving, fellas. And they are fully aware of that. And none of you have asked me where you're going. That's the idea. Because he's going to make a point. Here is how to understand the meaning of what he introduces in verse 4. He's not attempting to answer why he waited until now. That's off his radar. Rather, he is taking this opportunity to point out to the disciples how they are thinking. He's pointing out something that is unspoken but is obvious. In order, there's a reason, to illuminate them towards understanding. I didn't write it in there. I think themselves, how they are thinking, first of all, but primarily how their audience is thinking. They are being equipped and prepared for what next after he leaves and the Comforter comes. And he is pointing out to them their own thinking and to illuminate them, not to make them feel guilty, far from it, but to illuminate their thinking into the why as he explains what's going to happen. He does so by pointing out the fact that no one is bringing up the elephant in the room. You know, he's leaving. The master is leaving. The mentor, the sage, is leaving his disciples, unheard of, and no one is bringing up, well, where are you going? And that's a point. The elephant is, where are you going? And he brings this up to point out the very seat of their collective concern. He's leaving. What does this mean for me? That's how all of them are thinking. They're not thinking about where he's going. They're thinking of how this news is going to affect each of them personally. He's leaving. Oh my goodness. What does this, the world's falling apart. What does this mean for me? That's the point. Note, here's a side note. It's not a side note, it's directly correlated. Jesus, but we're pulling out here for a minute as a note. Jesus introduces their error in thinking, it's about me, because he believes the disciples have the capacity to receive what he is about to tell them. Jesus is very careful about what to say and what not to say and when to say it, because he has a recognition and a respect to where people's heads are. And the only reason he dives into this elephant in the room is not to make the people feel, the disciples, guilty, but to illuminate them in a very masterful, sagey kind of way. In doing so, he is exercising a critical discernment. What are they able to hear and what are they not able to hear? Later on, about 4 weeks out, I don't know the text, but he says, and there are many more things I could be telling you, but not now. So what he's telling them is critical for their lives and their success in the near future. And that's why he's diving into this elephant in the room. Bill. Yeah,
Um, I found this interesting because none of us asked anything yet. I mean, it's sort of like he's predicting what they're thinking, because a few verses down, they'll finally start talking to him and say, where are you going? What are you doing? And all that kind of stuff. So this seems to be kind of out of place, you know?
I don't understand, because nobody's asked him where he's going yet.
Yeah, but he said, none of you asked this. Well, it's kind of like, you know, you wish you'd waited until later and said, why are you asking this? I mean, it's sort of like, as the flow is kind of disrupted, I guess.
I guess I don't, any other comments on it? I guess I don't see the disruption that you do, but I'm, you know.
Well, he says, none of you are asking. Well, of course, none of it. He was hoping, I guess he's saying, I was hoping you would ask me this, sort of. Is that the other side of the statement?
Well, I don't know what his hope is. Well, my interpretation of it is that he certainly knows where these guys are at in their, you know, in their discipleship. And he's using this as an opportunity to move them forward, versus the idea of scolding them. And, you know, when I hear you say, I wish you would be asking me, I don't know what you're meaning, but I sense it's kind of a remorseful, guys, if you guys would have just got it. I don't take that position, but I don't know. Yeah. You know.
Right. Okay. It's interesting to me, but it's not critical.
Yeah. Jeff and then Tatsi, you guys have comments. Go ahead.
Yeah, Bill, I was just thinking that it really didn't matter to the disciples where he was going. It was that he was going. And I think what he's pointing out to them is, your thinking is, oh no, how's this going to affect me? Not what is the purpose for your leaving, and what's that mean to your kingdom? I think he was pointing out, you guys are thinking pretty selfishly, oh, woe is me. You know, it doesn't matter where he's going, but he's leaving me. Oh no. You know, and I think he's pointing out that, hey, if you were thinking beyond yourselves, you would ask, wait, where are you going? So I think he's pulling them out of their own, you know, selfish way of thinking.
Yeah. You know, Jeff, excuse me, Bill, Jeff, you've got the ability to say things way better than me. And that's exactly that's exactly how I feel about that. Tatsi, what are your thoughts?
My
I'll get
thoughts,
back to you, Bill. Hang on just.
Okay.
my thoughts are that up to this point, the disciples are just listening entirely to Jesus, and now he's trying to get them to think for themselves. That's kind of what my impression.
That's another, yes, that does give very solid bearing on what could be his motivation here. Thank you, Tatsi. Bill, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but
Well, no, I was looking at the previous chapter trying to see, and he talks about the advocate coming, but there's nothing in there where he says, I'm going away quite yet. He's just kind of talking to them about the fruit and the vine and the advocate and stuff like that. I don't see anywhere where he says, where they should be alerted to the fact he's leaving, I guess.
Okay, well.
John, go ahead. I'm done.
Yeah,
No,
John?
that's all right. So, and you remember John 14, they do have that conversation. He says to him, right, let not your heart be troubled. And then they kind of, you know, if I go, I'm coming back for you. And they said, where are you going?
That's true.
And-
Yeah.
Right. And then he makes this incredible statement where he says, I am the way, excuse me, I am the truth, I am life. Right. So they kind of did have that conversation.
You're right. Thank
Okay,
you.
Just
I didn't go back far enough. Yeah.
Yeah, John, you good Bible guy, you. Thank you for bailing us out here. Boy, this. Thank you.
Vince is our Bible guy. He's got it all memorized. We got to ask Vince what's going on.
Dave, you've got a comment.
Well, I guess if I'm hearing your your take on it, Mike. I guess I see it a little bit different in verse 5. I think the verb used there in that sentence of going, the full meaning of that is I'm going back to where I came from. That's the meaning of that verb.
Yeah.
And I think, like John just pointed out, I think the intent of this verse or a statement there says, none of you can ask me where you're going. That's a statement saying you can't ask me. I've told you. I've none of you have. None of you need to ask me where I'm going. I've told you where I'm going. So I take it as a slightly different stance, I guess. And
Right. Yeah.
since you guys know where I'm going, then I'm telling you that sorrow has filled your hearts because you know that I'm going. So I don't know. It's just a slightly different perspective.
Well, yeah, that is a different take on it, but let's just put these on the shelf. You know, we're all trying to work through all this. So let me continue with what I was thinking. And Dave, thank you for that contribution. But because I've said these things to you, grief has filled your heart. Now, from my position, where I'd say is they've heard the fact he's leaving, and they're asking the question, what about me? And they don't like that. And that's, Dave, that's where I think, and I could be, I'm throwing it out there just like everybody else, that grief has filled your heart because they're going to feel abandoned. Now that's where I'm, that's how I'm looking at it. He continues to make his point through describing what they are collectively feeling at this moment.
Just fell out or something.
It would not fall out.
Their collective focus.
I was blowing around out there with the floor, and maybe it unscrewed it and it fell out. I don't know.
Hey, Carl, we can hear your conversation.
Oh, you can hear the conversation. I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
It's okay. It's okay. So their collective focus is inward. Again, that's where my head is on it. It resides upon their own perceived personal loss because of the news of his soon departure. Thus, and I have I've got an illustration here, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. On the news of his leaving is their situation. That's the occasion. Just like you and I are in numerous occasions throughout the day, every situation we come up with is an occasion. So the situation is the news of his leaving. And whenever you and I are in a situation, as the disciples are, any occasion, there are numerous possibilities. And this gets into wave. This is at the what I was talking a few weeks ago about particle versus wave, and that all reality is a wave. And it's that kind of stuff is really fascinating. But if you think about how we make decisions by choosing out of numerous possibilities. So numerous possibilities, they're not real yet. I mean, they're not substance yet. They're only possibilities. But what occurs is that the disciples did choose. They collectively chose a certain way of thinking about this, i.e., I think, abandonment. What about me? And so that was what they chose. They could have chose other things, but they chose this. And when they chose that, this is what mathematically is so interesting about this idea of process and possibility. When they chose that one way of thinking, what about me? All other possibilities collapse. Everything collapse. They nullify. And as a result, there's a second pole. There's the near pole, the current position, there's the far pole, and that brings them into substance. So therefore, that substance of their choices is grief. They chose their outcome through their choice of what was in their head. They chose it. Grief, and grief was their outcome. It says here in the text, grief has filled your heart. That is their current, that is their state. At the moment they are sharing a common grief over the fact that he's leaving. Now, that's what could have been. And this is what could have been there is what can be for us as well. The same text, but I tell you the truth. No, I'm moving on. I tell you the truth. It's to your advantage, he says. It's to your advantage that I'm leaving. They didn't like it, but he's saying it's to your advantage. For if I do not leave, the helper will not come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you. They did not want it. They were in grief because of the very fact he was leaving. But they were only looking at a piece of it, and they based their decision on a piece. If the disciples had chosen a different possibility among numerous possibilities, and that possibility is the one which corresponds to what is actually true, they are responding from their own heads, not from what is true. What is true is what's going to happen is to their advantage, but they don't understand it. Their perspective would have been much different. Bill, what are your...
Well, I mean, you can't fault them until he tells them what's going to happen. They hadn't have a clue that was a possibility. I mean, grief is a natural outcome. He's going to leave. They don't know he can send a helper and all that stuff.
He's not faulting them at all. It's the way we are, and it should give them insight into not only themselves but into their audience, which they're the same people. It's how we are as people. And so this is a great teaching moment to move them ahead into what is coming when the Comforter will be there. Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, and my thought is that, in their own selfishness, and I'm trying to get in my own head on this, their teacher tells them he's leaving, and they're thinking, this is going to be bad. This is going to be worse for us. And Jesus goes, no, this is going to be better for you.
Right.
Because if I don't leave, you don't have the advocate or the helper, and I can't remember what Dave's translation said, but it was different than those two. And it was, he's basically saying, you guys are grieving, but I'm telling you, it's going to get better, because when I leave, I will send the advocate for you who will, and he doesn't explain this, but eventually they're going to realize this advocate actually lives in them, gives them power to do what Christ is telling them they're going to be doing.
Yeah, they just don't get it yet. They just don't. And that's the story. I mean, that is it. Let's move on. Jesus calls what is about to happen to their advantage. That means this is good news, guys, although they don't look at it as good news as yet. Their pain, because of their grief, is not necessary. Just hold that one in tension. Their pain, which is, I'm identifying with the grief that they are experiencing, is not a necessary thing. So now let's look at it from a different perspective. The news of his leaving, the situation, we put the entire graphic there, and here it is. There's another choice that could have been made. Not their choice. What about me? And of course, we're putting that into the text. And if they would have made a different choice, whatever that choice was, more in correspondence with, hey, maybe we should just kind of hold back on this a little bit, there would have been a different outcome. Different choice means different outcome. So to continue with that idea, they weren't bound by that choice. They made the choice. They did it. Jesus didn't do it to them. Jesus states what's actually true. What is about to happen is to their advantage. They are not able to receive it because they've chosen the wrong possibility. Grief. Oh, well, the outcome is grief. And they chose the wrong possibility because of where their heads are at this time. Again, no fault. It's just how we are, how they are, how we are. So grief, right there, that's their outcome. Grief. The disciples, being unaware, actually chose grief for themselves. They chose it. Nobody chose it for them. This should give us really a lot of insight into us as humans. Much of the pain that we experience it because of our own choices. And I'm going to let you talk here in a minute, Bill. And this specific example illustrates the broader human problem. Much of my early life was about them. It's not about them. It's what's going on inside of me. And we all know people who walk through life blaming. There's a need to blame other people. The problem is with you. It is not. It's what's inside that is illuminating the way I'm thinking, and it's creating havoc in my head and in my body. Yes, Bill, go ahead.
I'm struggling with the idea of the word choice. I don't think they had a choice because they didn't have the knowledge. I mean, they didn't know there was another option.
Another option for what?
He's going to go away and send the comforter. He's telling them now, but he says, you have grief. Well, of course they have grief. He's leaving. They have no knowledge that he's going to do something else. Right?
Well, I'm not sure that, Bill, and I'm not real sharp on where we've come in our study. I don't perceive this out of left field. I think I'm taking the position, and I can't cite anything, but I think he's leading them in a course of thinking. I want to believe that he has already stated they are not going to be abandoned. There is a future for them.
I have to probably go back like John did and pull out those other verses.
Yeah.
But at this point, to me, it seems like this grief is natural, and it's not like they said I don't think they understood. I'm not saying they didn't know. I don't think
they understood. I totally agree with you, but
Okay.
I don't think he's just springing this on him. I mean, if we go back to what John stated earlier, there's enough in there at the introduction of this whole sequence. I go to prepare a place for you.
Right.
If
right.
I go, I come again. He's drawing them into a future for all of them, not just out of left field. He says this. So
Okay, I stand partially corrected. The only other thing I want to say is,
Steve, your thoughts?
Yeah, a lot of discussion here. It's good. I go to the top of your screen here and it is to your advantage that I am leaving. And to me, with your previous diagram with the arrow and
Yeah, yeah.
the delta and so on, there's a matter of where faith or trust is interjected into that thought process.
Yeah.
That I think is key, to be able to trust that which I cannot see. You know what I'm saying?
But Steve,
I
that
can't
is,
see the future. I have to trust that he's right here
it's,
to correct my
you,
thinking.
you are exactly correct. That is the implied, everything about what he is saying is about belief in him. When we are in a crux of human condition, we have that same invitation that I am going to place my faith, my trust in this moment within him. It's the only thing we have. Otherwise, our default mode is this. We go to saving ourselves to some degree. So Steve, right on. You're exactly correct in relation, at least how I'm looking at it. Sterling, you had a thought.
Well, I have a question first. So if we go back to 14, where I think that's where he first starts to present the idea that he's going to go away and don't be troubled. Are we from there to here, is this all one session of the disciples with Jesus? It is, right?
Well, that's the way John is,
Right.
that's the way John is writing it. How it actually happened, I think the short answer is yes, but nobody actually knows.
So I've been trying to listen and develop my own thoughts here at the same time. So I apologize if I'm kind of going a different direction here entirely. But so when it says in verse 6, mine is an NIV, rather, you are filled with grief because I have said these things. So what's happened at the end of chapter 15 was he starts explaining you're going to be persecuted. And then he starts out with 16 saying you're going to die. You're going to be killed. Anyone who kills you will think they are offering a service of God. So they're like, wait a second, they're starting to realize their potential future. And then here he introduces, nobody's asked where I'm going. That's where I started. I'm explaining to you I'm leaving, but you seem to be more concerned about, now that I've explained your persecution, that's really what your grief is about. When he says, again, in verse 6, these things, I think he's referring to their persecution. So I don't know if I'm thinking is that entirely different from what we've been talking about, Mike? I don't know.
Well, I think yes, I do think he's talking about their persecution, the hate that's going to be directed towards them after he leaves. And that's what he's preparing them for, how to deal with this. And it has everything to do with his leaving.
It's really probably both. It's that he's leaving, whereas they thought he was going to be their warrior king as a savior, but then he's leaving. And by the way, when I'm gone, you're going to be persecuted. I mean, this is what's been laid on him here. And it's all in one, again, maybe 15, 20-minute discussion. I mean, it would be a mind-blowing change.
That would be, yes. Yeah, that has been mentioned. That idea of mind-blowing change has been mentioned several times this morning, and that is absolutely the case. This is mind-blowing. And so we need to look at Jesus's, I take the position that Jesus is not trying to surprise them or to hunker down, guys, and tighten your bootstraps tighter. It's a promise of his continued presence, the reality of what is going to happen and how you disciples can take the message of good news, the gospel, to the world, and how the world is going to the world out there is what it means for them. Yes, he does. He says, he actually says that when they kill you, they think they're going to be doing God's service. That really shows you where their heads are at, what hate will do. So let's continue on. Thank you, Sterling. This is a very big coming reason. We're going to wrap up here with 6 verse 7. This is a very big deal. Jesus continues in his conversation, of which many of you have commented on, and in so doing, we can gain insight into the coming cross event. This is, the question, why did Jesus die on the cross? Why the cross? If Jesus is an example to us of how we can live, which I think is valid, I think there's more to it. I think the cross is the central point in all of history, the incarnation culminating at the cross event, which includes the resurrection. And this is how I understand it. He states he must go. That, I think he's talking about the cross, fellas. He's got to go, and he must go in order for the helper to come. He's made that statement very clear. His going is in direct correlation to the possibility of the helper who is to come. We need to pay attention. Jesus is explaining why he's about to die on the cross. The reason, without it, the helper could not come. He had to die so the helper could come. Why the horrific and humiliating death then? Why the cross? It's horrible. Why did he do that? Well, here is a very brief answer to a very big question. So bear with me. Well, at the time that this has taken place, Roman crucifixion was the most demonstrative type of death to get God's point across. I hold the position that no one took Jesus's life from him. He laid it down willingly for us. And so my case in point, I'm drawing my reasoning from the text itself, last chapter. Greater love has no one than this, that a person will lay down his life for his friends. That is not the only text, but that entry point there, that text informs how I think about the death of Christ on the cross. Greater love has no one than this, than a person lay down his life for his friends. John 15:13. I drew this text out because it's in the Gospel of John. And so I think it correlates to the flow of what John is trying to get across. Now, here's the point illustrated, and then we'll go to table time. I tell you the truth, it's to your advantage that I'm leaving, for if I do not leave, the helper will not come, but if I go, I will send him to you. So one last illustration. We've got a closed hand. From my perspective, at this point and juncture in their discipleship, the disciples are working from a closed fist. And their closed fist has everything to do with, what about me? This is bad news. This is news, and I interpret it as fearful news. What does this mean for my future? Here, I've come along this whole thing. I've been with you for 3 years, and now you're saying you're leaving? What the heck is going on? And I would naturally, Bill, there's no fault here. I would naturally go into self-defense mode, closed fist. His invitation is to go here. Everything about Jesus's invitation is about the open hand versus the closed fist. And it will be the role of the helper to take them to this place of an open hand and to continually keep them in that place of an open hand. Default mode as human being, this is the point of verses 5, 6, and 7. They are in a closed fist condition. Why didn't you ask me? He is leading them through this to the point of open hand, and that open hand is going to be inaugurated through the helper who's to come, who will draw you continually within this space, and you can live your life as an open hand. Now, table time. This is a pointed question, and you guys are free to respond however you wish. But I think the closed hand, open hand idea is a powerful image to talk about at this juncture, and ask ourselves, which of these hands represent you at this point in life? And again, you're free to respond however you wish. You can talk about you, or you can talk about, well, a person I know. I've heard about this guy. And so why do you think so? Why do you think you are operating from whatever hand you choose? Yeah, Bill, go ahead.
Well, I have to bring this into current time to understand this. And I'll use as an example the death of my mother. I didn't want my mom to die, and I did not want to let her go. And I know there's this passage that says, we do not grieve as others grieve, but we do grieve. So there's grief there, like the disciples. But do we dare say to ourselves, it's better that she goes than that she stays? Do we dare say that? Because it is. I mean, we can't live forever. We'll just be an empty shell. Do we dare say that if it's someone close to us, our spouse or a child? It's better that they die than they not die. That's a big pill. But somehow I see it coming forward into the present time.
Yeah, actually, we're going to go there, and I think about week 204, where Jesus describes at some detail. I mean, I'm going to give you my perspective on it, and it addresses this very thing.
Okay.
I don't think that comforts you in the loss of your mother or any of us who have lost loved ones, but it sure has bearing on it.
There's a resurrection out there, and we downplay that way too much.
And I'm going to call it a destiny. And
I like that.
I'm believing Jesus. The whole reason for his going, it's not about him, it's about their future. Right. There is a place. And this whole mystery of this thing we call death that's hanging over our heads, there is an answer, although it doesn't lessen the point, and we certainly don't want to try to lessen the grief, because it's natural we go through. Bill, thank you. Dave, your comment.
I've had two personal experiences recently that kind of address this point. It's what our perspective is. Are we open to what Jesus is really saying, and are we really open to what resurrection really means for us? And I do think sometimes in the business of our world, we tend to kind of shove that aside because we think it's too big for us to understand, or whatever. One of the occurrences happened actually just Monday night. I'll try to make this kind of brief. Betty and I went to Boulder to visit Betty's cousin. She's quite a bit older. She's 80, in her late 80s, and her husband is 95. And he had been having some health experiences, and we went down Monday night, and just about the time we got there, his wife, my wife's cousin, said, his name was Harold, he says, Harold sat down in the chair here a little while ago and just said, I'm not doing this anymore, this health thing. And that was about an hour before we got there, and about the time we got there, he died.
Wow.
My goodness.
Wow.
Says, I'm not doing this anymore.
Wow.
And about a month ago, I had the privilege of walking through a grief situation with a family, again, an older couple. She was well into her 80s, and her husband is 92. They had asked me ahead of time to walk through, and actually I quote unquote officiated the service. Her name was Billy, and she'd taken this dip in health, and her faith walk had been amazing for many, many, many years. And finally, one day, very soon after she had entered a care facility, but within a day, actually, her husband came in to talk to her, and her basic message was, I want to go home. And she just did this to him. And within 24 hours, she was gone. She left. She went to be with Jesus.
Yeah.
So I think there are timings and circumstances where the lights really come on about, is this all really true? And I think these two examples are examples of, if we could see that truth that clearly earlier on, not that we're going to have to die right now, but know what assurance we have when we do, then we'd be much more comfortable in facing that future. So those were in their own strange and unique way, very meaningful and encouraging to me.
Yeah, boy, two, that is amazing. You've had those two so close together. Thank you,
Yeah.
Dave. And that is exactly correct perspective. I think Totsi and then John. Go ahead, Totsi.
Yeah, it kind of addresses what Bill was talking about. Anyway, when my mom was on her deathbed in Hawaii, I flew from Colorado to see her, and I was not a believer at the time. And so on her deathbed, she was in a Catholic hospital, so there was a cross on the wall. And every once in a while, she would reach up towards that cross.
Wow.
She would reach up towards Jesus, okay? And she did that several times. And then when she expired, the intern came in and said, well, do you want me to give her adrenaline to bring her back? And she had specifically put down in writing that she did not want to be resuscitated.
Right.
So that whole thing to me was a testimony to me to saying that she really wanted to join Jesus in heaven. Okay. And it was actually something that I carried with me in my journey to eventually to where I came to Christ.
Huh.
So I'm just saying that to me, when I look back at that, I could see that she wanted to go to heaven to join Jesus. And my role, because I loved her, eventually was I wanted to have that same desire and join her and be able to join her in heaven. Okay.
Absolutely. Another really powerful story. Thank you, Totsi. And that is true of a lot of experiences. Yeah, John, go ahead and we'll wrap up with this one probably.
Great stories. My
Yeah,
goodness.
really good.
So I like to ask myself the question, and other people, are we willing at this point in our journey, at this point in life, are we willing to change? And which kind of goes with your theme here.
Yeah.
And so, what are we holding tight to? What are we holding on to? Is it a belief system? Is it certain beliefs? But anyway, we're holding tight, right? So to answer your question, it's both things, but you know, you were saying last week, if we're going to really experience life, we got to like be willing to let go and be open to really what Jesus is trying to tell us, really to what life is trying to tell us, right? And we hold tight to a couple things, right? The core, but we have to be willing to let go if we're going to really experience life. So yeah. So anyway, you know, great question here.
Thank you, John. Now, and we'll end it with that. And guys, a monumental illustration here of this holding on where it's natural. There's no fault here to these guys. It's where we are as people. Because they chose to believe a certain way, they entered into a grief in their experience through letting go, but they only had a portion of the truth. So what that is implying is there is more out there, fellas. There's more out there. Certainly, Jesus is talking about a more that exists. And that more, I think it's safe to say, based on what Jesus, the scriptures are teaching us, that future is also inclusive of us.
And Mike, can I say something quick?
Of course, yes.
It's amazing to me that when you take communion, one of the few required rituals that are clear in scripture, they say you celebrate his death until he returns, not his life. And I find that interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah. Death represents the ultimate letting go.
Mhm.
And through the letting go, Dave is illustrating that very point at this time. Through the letting go, there's life. I often say, for every death, there is a resurrection. And I think that's true. Have a good week, fellas, and 2 weeks. We'll see you in 2 weeks. I think 2 weeks. No, 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
3 weeks, yeah. My math is off. Well, I'll be back. You guys be together on the 8th and the 15th, and I'll see you on the 22nd. Bye for now, fellas.
My
See ya.
apologies, Mike, for this morning.